So, speaking of upbringing, when and where were you born?
I was born in Swansea in South Wales in the UK, and I was born in 1971
And
in the sub
so what is your astrological sign?
Cancerian. I'm a Cancer.
Aha. Well, so far we've had a lot of Aquarians and Pisces. I think you're my first Cancer. Hmm. Um, do you know your Myers-Briggs and Enneagram personality types?
No, I don't. I don't really know much about that, to be honest.
I love those kind of typologies because they help people understand each other. I sent the link to the Myers-Briggs in a recent email, so if you have time, that would be great. So you've spent most of your adult life as a nurse working in hospitals, is that correct?
Right? Yes.
And what kind of nursing did you specialize in?
Intensive care.
So that's why you've had encounters with people who had near-death experiences. Before we get to that, what was there about your upbringing that led you to university and to an interest in healthcare?
From a young age, really, I always wanted to be a medical doctor, and then it got to the age where I was supposed to study to go to college and university, and instead of studying, I kind of went out and partied more. And I thought, well, I'm not going to pass my exams, and I'll never make it to be a medical doctor. So I thought, what can I do instead? And so I thought, oh, I'll try nursing. And I started nursing, and it's the best thing I ever did. It's a fantastic career. I thoroughly enjoyed it all. And it's through my nursing career that I've understood about near-death experiences, and that's really what motivated me to study near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm. Um, and then somewhere along the way, you were motivated to get a Ph.D.
Well, yeah, but to be honest with you, I didn't really know what a PhD was. I just wanted to study near-death experiences. I became obsessed with them. And any way that I could have studied them, I wanted to do it. And by a series of synchronicities, it just happened that it led on to me doing a PhD. And so the way it all happened, it was just unbelievable, really. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with studying near-death experiences, and I thought I wouldn't let anything deter me from that. Once I got that interest, I just needed to know more, and it was just that was the driving factor to really get to the understanding to the bottom of it with near-death experiences. And I think when I first started my research, I was very naive, to be honest with you. I thought, right, at the end of this, I'm going to have all of the answers. At the end of this study, I'll know it all. But actually, my study actually raised far more questions than it answered. And there's so much more that we've got to learn about these experiences.
Mm-hmm. I think about that of what we know about the universe, that we know about 5% of the universe. We don't know 95%, this dark energy, dark matter. We don't know our gene structure. We call it junk, but we don't know what the junk portions of our DNA strands do. They're probably not junk. Yeah, there's a lot we don't know. And then what university was willing to let you delve into that paranormal topic?
It was the University of Wales in Lampeter. And I was lucky enough, really, because Professor Paul Badham, he was the head of department of theology and religious studies, but they had a special interest in spiritual experiences as well. And Professor Badham was quite an expert on near-death experiences, and I didn't realise this at the time. And when I first wrote to him and said that I had an interest in death because I worked as a nurse, I didn't tell him that I was fascinated by NDEs and I wanted to research them, because I thought he may think I was a bit unusual, with near-death experiences. But then he wrote back to me, because it was in the days before emails, and he wrote a letter and he said, if you'd give me details of the course that he ran in death and immortality. But he also then said, if you'd be interested in researching near-death experiences. And I just thought, I couldn't believe it. So it was great. And I wrote back. I phoned his office, actually. I phoned him as soon as I opened my mail. And I was there in his office about 2 hours later, having a conversation about how I could take this research forward. And there was just a series of synchronicities that happened, and it felt as if someone had rolled out a red carpet, and all I had to do was walk along it. And so my research kind of panned from there, really. But I think if I'd have realised the work that would go into doing that research, I think I'd have probably been put off, So I'd heard PhD, but I didn't really fully understand the implications of what it meant,
Uh-huh.
But it's just something that took over my life, and it still does now. So.
Then what's an example of one of the most synchronistic experiences that led you to the university?
Well, I think it was the way I connected really with my supervisor, Professor Paul Badham. I was reading all I could about death, and I read a chapter in a book, and it was written by Paul Badham. And at the end of the book, it said that he ran this course. It was an MA in death and immortality. And I thought, wow, that sounds really fascinating. I'd like to have more details. And so then I wrote to him. And then that's when we connected, and it transpired then that I had Professor Badham as my supervisor, but also Dr. Peter Fennick, who is a neuropsychiatrist and neurophysiologist as well. And so he is also an expert in near-death experiences, and I didn't know either one of these people before, and they both ended up being my supervisors. And it was just the way everything happened, because I had to go to the ethics committee, I had to get the approval, I had to go through all of that red tape in order to do my research. And I did it. It just happened. And any barriers that could have been in my way, or any obstacles, they just disappeared. And it was really, and the whole time that I was doing that research, for the 8 years, it took me 5 years to gather the data and interview patients. And then it took a further 3 years to analyse the data and write it up. And so for the whole of that 8 years, I felt like I was in this state of flow. It was just perfect. It was just lovely. And then when my research finished, I was almost at a loss because I didn't know what to do with my time anymore. And I can remember sitting in front of the computer for hours at a time, not being productive at all, because I was so used to being in front of the computer on my day. So
I can identify with all of that. How many NDEs did you have collected for your research? How many accounts?
So in the hospital research, there were only 15 accounts in that 5 years. So I looked at the frequency of the near-death experience. I looked at the possible explanations, like is it due to the dying brain? Is it due to the drugs that we give patients? Is it due to the abnormal blood levels that we give to the patients? Or are they simply just hallucinating? So I looked at all of those aspects, and it was fascinating. It really opened my eyes doing that research. And it was a privilege to do it, it really was. And I think being a nurse gave me that access to patients, and because they recognised me as being a nurse, and we had that rapport from the beginning. And I think if an outside researcher had gone in, it would have been a lot harder to get information from the patients as well. So I think it was just it just fitted in really well with my job.
Absolutely. Before we get into the research more deeply, what are the most difficult experiences, challenges of your life, and how did you cope? I'm asking that because I think it's useful to readers to know how smart people deal with those kind of challenges.
Well, in fact, the reason I got into my research is because I was looking after a dying patient, and he died a very unpleasant and suffering death, and that really upset me. It was during a night shift, and this man, he was in agony, and I was supposed to turn him over and change his sheets and wash him, but I knew if I did that, it's going to cause him even more pain. And I was in a bit of a dilemma because it was a role I had to do. It was something I had to do. But I thought if I do it, it's not going to be in his best interest. So I kind of pulled the screens around him, and I sat with him, and I just held his hand and helped him to calm down after the doctor had given him some more pain-killing medication. And then all I could do is just wash the parts of his body that I could reach that didn't cause him discomfort. And then I just sat with him, and it took ages for him to go off to sleep. And I couldn't stop thinking about him. I went home after my night shift in the morning, and I couldn't sleep that day. So I called work and I just said, "How is he doing?" And they said, "Oh, he died about 2 hours after you left your shift." And that just had such a profound impact on me. And it made me question everything. And I went through a real dark period of depression. And that was one of my biggest challenges in life. And it's a period of my life that I would never want to go back and revisit. But on reflection, it was also the best thing that ever happened to me as well, because it made me go inwards. And I'm really glad I didn't go and see a doctor, because I was so depressed, because I'd have probably just been given some antidepressants, which would have masked over the problem. It wouldn't have got to the root of it. But by going within and starting then to read about death and dying, it changed everything for me. And a lot of people say, "Penny, studying death, it's really morbid," but it's not. It had that opposite effect on me. And I think when we learn about death, we really start to learn about life. So I think, that was a lot of things, I think it was a big eye-opener for me, because I'd always been very scientifically minded as well. And then I started reading spiritual texts as well. And I'd never been into things like that. I was always an atheist, and the mention of any sort of religious thing or spiritual thing I was very closed to. But early on in my research, I went to a conference as well. And at that conference, they were discussing the book Conversations with God. It just came up as a kind of sideline. And it was in America, the conference. So on the way back in the airport, the Conversation with God book was there. So I bought it and I got into it, and I loved it. And it made me think, what if this is right? And it made me think that, what if my preconceived ideas that I'd been brought up with, what if they were wrong? And so, it started to open my mind, because I think up until that point, my mind had been very closed to things like that. And then getting into my research has just completely opened my eyes and opened my mind as well.
Were your parents atheists?
No, but they weren't particularly religious. They used to send me to Sunday school on a Sunday so that they could have some time to themselves. But no, they weren't religious at all.
Mm-hmm. Was that man's death so compelling for you because you felt helpless, or because he was in so much agony, or both?
Both, because our eyes connected when I went to do that nursing care. I touched the electric bed, and the bed went a little bit flat, and it caused him even more pain, and our eyes connected, and I just felt like I'd swapped places with him, and I could understand what he was going through. And he had a tracheostomy, so he couldn't talk, but he was mouthing the words, "Leave me alone, let me die in peace." And up until that point, I thought I'd been doing this great job saving all of these lives in the intensive care unit. And then I thought, wow, no, look at this. This isn't doing anything. We're not going to save this man's life. He is dying. And then I started to see it in a lot of other patients as well. And instead of then thinking I was saving lives, I saw things a little bit differently as well. And then that made me ask those questions. What is it about death that makes us put our patients through this kind of treatment if it's not going to benefit them in the long term,
So do you believe in that patients should be allowed to end their lives if they want to? Assisted suicide?
I don't know, that's a difficult one as well, you see. And I think it's all individual. It's down to individual. And I think the more we talk about death as a society, the more these conversations come out and the more we can learn from these conversations. So I think it is down to the individual, and it's a really difficult thing. Maybe we go through certain things in our life or certain processes because it's something that we learn from as well. So I don't know. It's a difficult question to answer.
What's the law in the UK about like physician-assisted suicide?
It's a lot of people actually go to Switzerland. There's a place called Dignitas in Switzerland where they are able to end their lives. But it's not the law in the UK at the moment. But there's a lot of debate about it all the time. But it's a very, very difficult topic, and it's very individual as well.
You said you read spiritual texts that influenced you. What else besides Conversations with God was impactful?
I think one of the first books actually was the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying.
Oh.
That was a lovely book. I really liked that. There was Stephen Levine, I think I read. Anything that had death in the title, and I was just reading. Wherever I went, I had a book in my hands. And all of my wages were just going on books all the time, And to me, it was just bliss learning about it,
Well, if someone was to look at your possible past lives, I wonder if there's anything that you brought in that made you have a mission to explore the effect of death on life and life on death.
Quite possibly, yes, yeah. Because it feels like I'm meant to be doing this work. It does feel like my life purpose, because it's just taken over my life. I'm a completely different person to what I was before I started my research. And now it's almost as if I got tunnel vision, excuse the pun, but all I can see is about near-death experiences. That it just, it fascinates me. It's taken over my life.
If I were to feel it out, it feels like you had a past life where there was slaughter of the innocents, some kind of massacre, and that you were helpless to stop the massacre of all these helpless people on this big battlefield. But it wasn't just soldiers, it was civilians too. And I think that you wanted to feel like you had some kind of efficacy, some kind of impact to help people who were dying or prevent dying or whatever. That's what pops up from my unconscious mind. Yeah, I can see you on that field of slaughter. Then was your dissertation publicized as near-death experience of hospitalized intensive care patients in 2008?
That's right, yeah. So that was my whole PhD thesis, and there was just so much information in it that I just wanted to get it out there so that anyone could look at it and anyone could read it and then choose to go on and do their own research and, learn from mine and then build on what I've done. Because, if you look at in the grand scale of things, there's not much hospital research being done, really, if you compare it to other sorts of studies. So I think, that's what we need. We need more and more of this research. And I think, so I put it out there so that everyone can see what I did and people can build on that as well, So, yeah, because I think when you study things in the hospital setting as well, you can check certain factors as well. So you can look at the medical notes, you can check what drugs they had, you can check with the staff who were looking after the patient at the time, and you can check to see if what they reported, if they had an out-of-body experience, if that correlated with what was going on at the bedside. And so there's lots of advantages of doing hospital research. But it does take a lot of time and a lot of effort as well. Yeah,
but as a nurse, you were right there to do it. Then you wrote The Wisdom of Near-Death Experiences in 2014. What is an NDE? A Beginner's Guide to NDEs 2016. The Transformative Power of Near-Death Experiences, How the Message of NDEs Positively Impact the World, 2017. So what came out of your research that's new in each of those books?
I think the point I wanted to make with the wisdom of near-death experiences is that sometimes we spend so much time trying to find an explanation for what a near-death experience is, or we're looking for causes. that we've overlooked the most important thing, which is the message of the near-death experience. So we can all learn from these people. These people have temporarily died or almost died. It's something that's going to happen to me eventually, and it's going to happen to every one of us. We're all going to die, and none of us really know what's going to happen until we face it in its entirety. But I think with these people who have the near-death experience, they have that important message that we can all benefit from. And I think in particular, the underlying message is treat others as you would wish to be treated yourself, which is it's at the heart of all of the wisdom traditions. Every different tradition and religion has said, treat others as you would wish to be treated yourself. And I think when people have the near-death experience, especially with the life review aspect, some people feel like they relive their life and in a matter of seconds, because they might only be unconscious for a matter of seconds, but they literally feel like they've relived every aspect of their life in great detail as well. And sometimes they can even have their life review from a third person perspective. So people who they've interacted with, they can feel like what it's like to be in their shoes. So if inflicted violence on someone, they can feel like what it's like to receive that violence. But also, if they've been really nice or kind to someone, they can feel like what it's like to be on the receiving end of that kindness as well, and feel that ripple effect further down the line as well. So I think that underlying message is really important, and it does have a big bearing on the life of people who survive a near-death experience, because it does guide them in their life when they come back to life as well. And I think that's something that we can all learn from. Everything that they say, if you can engage with that near-death experience, for me, just through that engagement of this experience and studying them, it's changed my life as well. So anyone can be changed by engaging with these experiences.
I interviewed Eben Alexander, and he said that he didn't have that review of his life because all his memory was erased, but he certainly came back with what you said, the feeling that we will be judged. I don't mean that to sound harshly, but we will be judged on our actions and pay the consequences. So it changed his whole life.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of people say that during their life review, it's themselves who's doing the judging. So there's no third party who is judging them as such. Some people have their life review accompanied by a presence or a being of light. And very often that being of light is acting as a source of comfort as they are reliving difficult parts of their life review as well. So it's the person themselves who does the judging, and so there's not as if it's judged by a third person. So that's an interesting aspect as well.
Yeah, we would all act very differently, I'm thinking, if we knew we would be judged in that way. I have this picture of the fundamentalist. You on Judgment Day, you will be judged, go to heaven or hell. And I know it's not like that, but we definitely have to work through our inadequacies and experience what we need to, so we grow. Yeah. And then the other three books, what was the innovative?
Yeah, well, the book "What is a Near-Death Experience?" that was part of a series that my publisher was doing on all different subjects. So they thought it was a nice idea to just get like a little pocket guide, so a little book that you could dip into. So if you're a complete novice, you can just dip into it, chapter by chapter, and just learn about near-death experience. So that's the basics really in that book. And then the last book I published, which was co-authored with Kelly Walsh, The Transformative Power, that again is a collaborative book. So it's got lots of different people who discuss their own near-death experiences and the effect that it's had on their life. Because one thing I noticed as well with my research is that it's not just you have the near-death experience and it stops. It has that ongoing effect in someone's life. And very often people are transformed in many different ways. Sometimes it just can be on that individual personal level, but sometimes it can be in a very public way as well. And people want to become of service to other people as well. And sometimes they feel like it's their mission to do something as a result of their near-death experience. Now, that's certainly the case with Kelly, my co-author. She had a near-death experience, and that has really impacted how she's lived her life since. And she had a near-death experience following a suicide attempt when she was in the psychiatric ward. And she had this experience where she felt that she was travelling through 7 bumps in the universe, is what she kind of describes it. And it was a struggle to get beyond each bump. But once she was past the 7th bump, she has never experienced such an intense and unconditional love. And she can't even put it into words. It's beyond words. And then when she revived on the ward, she just had this like psychological boost, if you like, and she was felt differently. She felt invincible. She tried to leave the ward. She didn't have any clothes on. She was naked. She tried to leave the ward because she thought there was nothing wrong with her. She didn't need to be there. She went from being severely anxious and depressed for most of her life to turning it all around, and now she's created a character called Positivity Princess, and she's created a children's cartoon character and children's book, and it's all about promoting that message of positivity as well. And she's set up a charity called the Love Care Share Foundation, where all the proceeds from that book will go into, or all the royalties will go into this charity, which is to support children around the world. And so she is on this mission. And when I spoke to her for the first time, she had this idea. She'd patented the brand Positivity Princess. She had ideas for merchandise with children's T-shirts and things like that. And if you think about it, she could potentially make millions of pounds. But she doesn't want to make that money for herself. She wants that to go back into the charity to generate funds for the charity. So she's got this great business mind, but it's not about her gain, it's about doing good for others. And that I found with people who've had the near-death experience, many of them want to become of service to other people as well.
And there's also some odd results, like people get kind of powerful electrical impulses, and machines and experiments go crazy when they're around.
Yeah, now that really fascinates me, and I notice it. I ask everyone who contacts me now and shares their experience, I always ask them if they have problems wearing wristwatches, because very often the watch will stop for them, and kettles, computers, toasters, anything electrical will actually malfunction in their presence. And that is something that fascinates me, because I'd love to learn more about that. And that's something that we could potentially measure as well. So, we could perhaps devise some experiments in the future to look at that aspect of it. So, that fascinates me.
Do you have any wild ideas why that is? What part of the body is being...
I don't know, but it seems to be linked with a shift in consciousness. So I don't know whether it's because these people have accessed a deep level of consciousness that normally I think the brain would screen out. I don't know. They don't really know enough about it, which is why we need to do more research and devise more experiments, because not everyone who has a near-death experience is affected in this way. So why are some affected in it that way and why aren't others? So we don't know enough yet.
I was really interested that you had a patient who had a frozen hand that was a problem most of his life, and after his NDE, it opened up and was functional.
Yeah.
Any wild ideas about why?
No, again, we don't know. And at the time, when I was interviewing him, I didn't realise that the significance of that. It was only when I discussed it with the physiotherapist and the doctors, and they said that, his hand, those tendons in his hand would be in a permanently contracted position. So he shouldn't be able to open out his hand without surgery to release those tendons. And he just clearly just went, look at my hand, I can do that. So, and I've got a signed statement by his sister who says he's never been able to open it out. It's only since his experience. But again, if we understood the mechanism behind that, that could potentially save healthcare millions and millions of pounds and dollars. So, I'd love to understand why. So I think these things are so important to research further.
You know what that makes me think of is people who have dissociative identity disorder. One alter will have diabetes and the other not. So it's similar phenomena.
Yeah, that's right. It is. And yeah, that's a really great analogy. And in fact, I can remember someone emailing me when my book, The Wisdom of Near-Death Experiences, came out, and he made the connection with people with dissociative identity disorder also having changes in their electromagnetic field.
Oh.
There's a link. So if there's anyone out there watching this, please do more research and take this further. Yes, I forgot about that, so that's a really good point. So there's so much that we need to learn about,
Well, it would be interesting to work with a psychiatric unit. Is there a psych unit in your hospital?
There's one kind of attached to the hospital, but I don't actually work as a nurse anymore. So, but there could be a way around, of doing further research. Yeah, that could be a further avenue for future research.
It would be interesting just to hook them up to all kinds of, physiological measurements and heart rate variability and skin sensitivity and all that, and especially when they were in different alters, and see what changed.
Yes, that would be really good, actually. Anyone done some research?
I think it's you, Penny. One of your patients, Raja Benamor, she went through the whole creation of the universe. Did she remember it, and did you remember it? Because that's good information.
Right. Yeah. No, with Raja, I met her at a conference. She wasn't one of my patients in my hospital. So I met her in Marseille in a conference that we both spoke at. And I was fascinated by her story because she had just gone in for a routine operation, some surgery, and she just had this phenomenal experience. And she said it was so extensive that it would take 5 volumes of book to write about it all. Now, she didn't go into it in great depth because there was a limited time for the presentation at the conference, but I was able to speak with her afterwards, but it was through a translator. So because she's Arabic and she was speaking in French. So she remembered going through a life review back to her own birth and then back to the creation of the universe as well. But that's as far as we got because then the interpreter had to go.
Oh, no.
So she in that in depth. But she has written a book about it, but it's not in English, it's in French. So I'm still waiting for the English version to become available. But she had loads of different things, and she had changes in her electromagnetic field that were extensive. And interestingly for Raja, which is very intriguing, is that she's acquired this in-depth knowledge of quantum physics. And she worked in retail, and it was after her experience that she started to understand quantum physics to the point where she actually went to the university and enrolled on a course. And what I found really fascinating in this conference that we were at is that they'd interviewed her university professor. And he said, he couldn't understand how Raja had such deep-seated knowledge because the knowledge and everything that she was writing about, it's not something that you can acquire through just reading books or attending a short course. This is like deep-seated knowledge. And he felt that some of the things that she was writing about in her papers for him were beyond his own knowledge, but that they were being verified by new publications in physics journals.
Wow.
So, that to me is fascinating. I'd love to work with Raja in the future, and do more work with her, and then follow through what she's written in her papers for her university professor and see if 10 years down the line they're even, verified again,
Fascinating. So let's talk about the arguments of skeptics that it's oxygen deprivation, it's the hallucinations of the dying brain. And what could you run through like the most prominent arguments that NDEs are not some kind of vision to another dimension, they're just crazy brain problems?
Well, it is quite logical to think like that, and in fact, those are the things that I was looking at with my research when I started doing it. I thought, oh, I'm sure I can prove what these are, you know. And if you think about it, we've all got brains, and if we're approaching death, it's logical to suppose that they would shut down in the same way, and it would create some sort of experience or illusion. But then what I found is that people were, particularly a few patients in my research, like one of them met up with a deceased relative in his experience, and he had a message then for a living relative. So when he came back to life, he gave that message to the living relative, and she was astounded that he should know that information. So they seem to, I don't know, it's a heightened state of reality, what they describe, and other things like, let me think, I've lost my train of thought here.
Well, we're talking about arguments against it, like it's just oxygen deprivation. It's hallucinatory. Yeah. It's not really access to another consciousness or reality.
Yeah. Now, what people do describe with a near-death experience is a heightened state of reality. So they say it's realer than real, and you couldn't possibly understand it unless you've had that experience for yourself. And then when I documented all the cases of the near-death experience, but I also documented 12 successive cases of patients who'd clearly been hallucinating. And then I analysed both sets of experience. And what I found with the patients who'd been hallucinating, when I followed them up, they could rationalise that they'd been hallucinating, and most of them were very embarrassed by their behaviour. I found that when I investigated what they were reporting during their hallucinations, it seemed to be attributable to things that were going on in the background. So there was a correlation with things that they were hearing, that what they were feeling as doing to them, and staff conversation, and things like the alarms going off in the background. All of those things seemed to contribute to this. It was very confusional hallucination. Now, with the near-death experience, it was very precise. It followed that pattern. They were all unique, but they followed that pattern. And the people after the near-death experience were adamant that it was real, whereas people who'd been hallucinating could rationalise that it had been a hallucination. So, and again, when we've got that patient who had the hand, and his hand is now able to open out. So, you know, how do you explain that as just being a hallucination? I don't know. So anyway, that didn't seem to be the case. And when I looked at things like drugs, because we do give a lot of patients potent drugs in the intensive care unit, when I analysed that data, if anything, the drugs that we give the patients were more likely to inhibit an experience rather than create it. So there were lots of patients who did have these drugs on board, but they didn't recall a near-death experience. There were some who recalled the beginning of a near-death experience or part of it, and then they were sedated afterwards, and they no longer remembered it. So I think the drugs, in fact, can impair the recall of the experience rather than create an experience. And then if you look at things like the oxygen levels and the carbon dioxide levels, there were cases in the research where blood was extracted at the time of their near-death experience, but the blood levels were within normal limits. And there were cases where patients were fully ventilated throughout the time they were unconscious, so they were receiving a large amount of oxygen, and there was no hypoxia at all. So yet they still reported a near-death experience. But of course, those are small samples, so we do need bigger samples to draw more conclusions. But I think it's a start, you know, and it's something for other people to build on and for more research to be done. But I don't think the current explanations for what the near-death experience is, I don't think they're feasible, because I think we're trying to explain it from the materialistic scientific perspective, and I think it goes beyond that. And I think the materialist perspective is that the brain produces consciousness, but I don't believe that to be true anymore. It makes more sense in light of my studies and in light of my research that the brain mediates consciousness, but it doesn't produce it. So I could, my belief is that the brain is in some way acting like a filter, and it screens out this heightened state of consciousness from around, which is around us all the time, but we're just not aware of it because the brain screens it out. And I think that there are times in our life where that filter action relaxes and this heightened state of reality is allowed into our everyday experience. And that makes much more sense to me. And I think consciousness is primary, and we as physical beings come from that consciousness. And that makes more sense to me, that we're all spiritual beings having a temporary human experience. That's what makes.
Yeah, Bernardo Kastrup, when I talk with him, he said the same kind of thing. And it's not just NDEs, it's psychedelic drugs, it's prolonged stress. He said maybe the reason that indigenous peoples can, sense where's the water, where's the game in a very intuitive, clairvoyant way is because they're stressed. And then that somehow opens up the filter of the brain. So unusual stresses create unusual access to other forms of information. Does that make sense?
It does make perfect sense, yeah. And there's lots of different routes to access in this altered state of consciousness. And so they're all kind of according to the psychological set and setting. So if someone is going to take sort of LSD, they do it with the intent of having a sort of trip. Whereas with a near-death experience, you can't plan to go and have one. It just happens instantaneously out of the blue. And so there's slightly different contexts in which they are experienced then. But I think what they're all doing is accessing this primary source of consciousness that we've lost touch with, I think,
Mm-hmm. What really is striking to me is I've read, numerous or several accounts of people who are technically brain dead on a surgical table. So their brain is not functioning. And so memory couldn't be either. But afterwards they'll say, oh, the surgeon inserted this in the vein in my left thigh, and this person said this, and this music was playing. So they have a very detailed memory, I guess you'd say, of the experience while they were brain dead.
Yeah, well, technically they probably wouldn't be brain dead as such. Their hearts may have stopped beating and their EEGs would have been flat. So yes, they technically shouldn't have any conscious experience, but what they are reporting is a heightened state of reality. So that defies then the explanation that consciousness is produced by the brain. So I think the alternative is that we have to explore other possibilities, and the possibility that consciousness is primary seems the most obvious to me. Mm-hmm. But of course, against everything that we've been brought up to believe. So it changes everyone's worldviews then as well.
That's exciting. There's a physician, I think is an anesthesiologist in Louisiana, who's written about NDEs. Maybe Long, is that his name? Do you know his work?
Jeffrey Long, oncologist, is it?
Yes. And I read his book, and he said that a few percent of people who have NDEs experience it like death. I mean, like hell. And it's scary, and there's demons, and they're terrified. Because my view of NDEs was you're greeted by this being of love, and you go through the tunnel of light, and your friends and relatives come and greet you, and it's this blissful love experience. But have you run across people who it wasn't blissful?
Yes, I have. In fact, in the hospital research, there were 2 patients, and they kind of categorised in 3 ways, according to some research that Professor Bruce Grayson and Nancy Evans-Bush did back in a while ago now. And what they have categorised it is the first type is the prototypical usual near-death experience, but it's interpreted in a distressing way. The second type is like the void experience, where people find themselves in this black, meaningless, eternal void. And then the third type is the hellish experience, where people feel that they're in hell or being dragged down into hell by demons. And that is the most unpleasant aspect. And it can create a form of post-traumatic stress as well, to the point that patients won't talk about it. People don't want to even recall it because it's that terrifying for them. And in my research, I had one lady who had the usual kind of near-death experience, but interpreted it in a very frightening way. And then I had another case where a lady felt she was looking into hell. And as soon as she started to recall the bit where she got into hell or was looking into hell, she started to get very distressed and almost to the point of hysteria. So I had to terminate the interview. And the only thing I could do to reassure her was to say that some people have these unpleasant experiences, but they can turn into pleasant experiences as well. And when I went to visit her again 2 or 3 days later, she said, "No, please go away. I don't even want to think about this experience. It's too much for me." And she died shortly afterwards as well. So I was never able to get any more information on that.
Well,
but yeah.
It's so interesting because religions have talked about heaven, purgatory, and hell. So maybe there is some kind of literal dimensional planes like that, depending on your evolution.
It could well be. Yeah, we don't know. But
have you read Robert Monroe's experiences astral traveling?
Yes, that was those. I think I read one of his books, and that was at the very beginning of my research. I can't recall much of it, but I remember being absolutely captivated by that book as well. Yeah,
it ties into me because he found some dimensions. And I think even Alexander had that too, that were the blissful love, great unity, oneness. And then somehow this stuck in my mind that that Monroe found the people who were addicts on Earth, that they were just in a ball of kind of whirling, twirling, entwined need. That their addiction was still so strong even in the afterlife, that they were all clumped together just needing wanting, and it was obviously very unpleasant. So I guess the implication is there are different levels depending on if you're Hitler or Buddha, where you end up.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
But then in some of Dr. Long's cases, they were in heaven, but they were helped out. So they had some kind of guide that ushered them out. So that was encouraging.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Journal of Near-Death Studies. Are there other journals, organizations that do this kind of work that you follow?
The Journal of Consciousness Studies as well. That's another really good journal. The Study of Scientific Exploration, Society for Scientists. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
There's in the UK as well. One of the first groups that I joined was the Scientific and Medical Network, and also the Alistair Hardy Society as well. And they've got a lot of work in this field as well.
The Alistair Hardy, I don't know about that.
That is based at Lampeter University, and it was at Oxford University first in England. Sir Alistair Hardy was an Oxford Don, and he was a biologist, but he became interested in these experiences. And back in the 1960s, he put an advert in a national newspaper. And it just said something, have you ever sensed a presence greater than yourself that you can't explain? And he had like 6,000 replies to that.
Wow.
And I've been enough to sit in the archives of the Alistair Hardy Society and read some of those mails as well. And a lot of them describe near-death experiences. Some of them are just spiritually transformative experiences. But these were all before Raymond Moody's book came out as well. So people have been describing these for years and years and years,
Well, mystics have described them for centuries, the mystical experience. I'm interested in universities that include the paranormal or parapsychology or psi research. And if I'm got this right, Nottingham, no, Edinburgh had an endowed chair to study, and then it produced grad students who kind of spread around the UK to teach. Is that how it got started?
There's a big professor up in Edinburgh, but also in Northampton as well, Professor Chris Rowe. He does a lot of work at Northampton, and he'd be a great person to interview if you.
I've tried. I've definitely tried. I haven't. He hasn't said yes yet.
Right. Yeah, so he's really great. But yeah, Lampeter has that strong department there as well at the University of Wales, Lampeter, where I studied. So yeah. But there are few universities really that take these kind of subjects on board, so it's really difficult to study. But thankfully, it is growing. And I know Professor Les Lancaster as well has done. He offers an MA in transpersonal psychology, I think it is.
Where is that?
It might be in Leeds. I can't remember, to be honest with you.
What's
and Steve? Professor Steve Taylor. He's at University of Leeds. He's done a lot of work on spiritual experience as well.
And what's Lancaster's first name at Leeds?
Les.
How do you spell that?
Les. Les.
Oh.
Les Lancaster.
Oh, like Les. I got it. It's very tempting to turn to quantum physics, quantum mechanics to try to explain these paranormal phenomena. Have you kind of delved into that, maybe with the help of Ms. Benamor?
Well, no, not with Raja, but yeah, I have tried to explore it, but to be honest with you, it's beyond my understanding. It's like mind-boggling. So I have read little bits, but it's blown my mind, to be honest with you, and I can't get my head around it. I know I bought The Self-Aware Universe by Amit Goswami. What else? I've got a few books on it, but to be honest with you, I don't get very far.
Well, all the quantum physicists themselves said it's weird, and Einstein said it's spooky. So they all agreed it was very weird.
Yeah, and I just can't get my head around it.
Well, I think what most people that I've been talking to have a physics background say, we don't know how something like quantum entanglement works. We don't know.
That's right, but quantum entanglement would very well be an explanation for people who have empathic or shared death experiences. So a patient could be dying in a hospital in the UK, but a relative might be out in the USA, and they might have a moment where they appear at the bedside of the living relative as if to say goodbye.
Oh, yeah.
So, visitation. So that would be explained by quantum entanglement, maybe, so.
But they won't let us do that, but it's very tempting. Well, have you had any personal conversations with people on the other side, people who've departed?
No, I haven't. No, nothing like that.
My grandmother, when I was in high school, died, and she would come and pop corks out of wine bottles and open cupboards in the kitchen to say hello. So my mother would say, "Gammy's here," and we go, "Hi, Gammy." And it was very friendly. It was, it wasn't scary. It was like, oh, she's saying hello.
Yeah. You just jogged my memory, actually. Yes, when my grandmother died, yes. She always, because we used to talk about death, because she was well aware of my research, and we used to have long conversations. Yeah. And she said, "I'll come back and I'll wind you up." And I said, "All right then." And then actually when she died, it was shortly in the days after she died, I was in my house and I was at the backyard and I had the music on, and the music suddenly went from a low, say number 10, it went right the way up to 50, and it was blasting out music. And so I ran, I turned it down, I went back out, and it did it 4 or 5 times. And I said, Nan, that's you winding me up, isn't it? And it stopped. After that, it didn't happen. So
that's a good
yeah.
story. That's a really good story. So if you're not being a nurse now, are you being a full-time writer and speaker? Is that what you're doing?
No, I actually work at the university now in Swansea, and I work in the adult education department, and I did teach 2 courses about my research on the part-time degree. So the first module was science, spirituality and health, and then the second module was exploring the mind and consciousness. And they were really popular modules with the students. You know, there was a lot of demand for them to be continued, but I don't teach anymore. It's just things got too busy for me, and it was too hectic and lots of things going on in work. So I've not taught for this year anyway. So maybe I'll resume again in the future. But I'm looking to do online courses now as well. So that's the next thing I'm concentrating on, because it's difficult. You've got to do a job to pay the bills, but I'm passionate about my work as well, and I really want to get my work out there and just share what I've learned, and so I do a lot of speaking events on weekends and in the evenings as well, and that's what I want to be doing more, you know. So yeah, so look out for online courses, because that's what I'll be doing.
How many people have shared their experiences on your online webpage?
There's not many on my webpage, to be honest with you, but when my book, The Wisdom of Near-Death Experiences, came out, they kind of went viral because it was serialized in a national newspaper, and as a result, I've still got to reply to over 14,000 emails. I replied to a lot of them in the beginning, but it was a full-time job.
Yeah.
And the time, so from the end of January till the end of May that year, it was just a full-time job responding to emails and doing speaking events. And I was pregnant at the time as well with my son. And so I had to stop when I was giving birth, obviously. And I've just not had time to go and reply to them all. So there's over 14,000 emails that are outstanding. So if anyone has emailed me and they're listening, I'm sorry if I haven't responded. I will do it at some point. I'm hoping to get an assistant to help me as well. So that's something for the future. But certainly all those emails I've got safe, and I do plan on responding to them.
Do you have another book in your mind, or have you kind of exhausted NDEs?
Well, I did have another book on my mind, but it's kind of been on the back burner for about 6 years now, so I've not really got very far with it. But I was looking at consciousness from both ends as well, because when I started my Ph.D, I got very interested in pre-birth experiences as well, and that was something that really fascinated me, and I thought, if you can have a consciousness when you're about to die, perhaps you can have consciousness before as well. And it just made me think of all different types of consciousness, really. And that's something that I really was fascinated with, and I was sidetracked for a while. So I'd like to get back to that as well, because I have linked up with a few people who've actually remembered their physical birth as well, and remembered being in the womb. And
oh, wow.
Technically they shouldn't have any memories of that, because the neuronal circuits in the brain haven't formed. So that's another interesting aspect. So that might be something for the future.
So pre-birth means while you're in uterus, not a previous life.
No, just while you're in uterus. But then there are some anecdotally reported cases as well, and in some cultures, people have these significant dreams of dreaming of seeing their parents and choosing their parents as well. So, it all ties in then as well. And so I'd like to explore that further to see if there are correlations or if it's just anecdotal.
Do you know Michael Newton's books about our lives before we come in. Those are really pertinent.
Yeah, very, very interesting as well, because that links it all up as well, you know. So, yeah.
So as I think what I took away from that is that we work with the council of elders and guides to decide, I'm going to come in with this family in this area where I could learn these skills, and we've incarnated together before, so we want to work through this together. Is that kind of your sense of what happens?
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, I'd like to explore that more, yes.
Um,
But
do you have one child or do you have more?
yeah, just one. Yes, yeah, just one. He's nearly 5 now, so keeps
Uh,
me busy.
oh yeah, my grandson is 8, and so it's a good time because they can talk to you.
Aha.
I
Yeah.
told my grandson that I interviewed a Nobel Prize winner in physics. I said, "Do you know what physics means?" And he says, "Yeah, they study anomalies in space time."
How? How?
So just a few more questions. What do you do for fun? How do you keep balanced in the face of all this work and writing and family?
Well, spending time with my family, my son, and especially keeps me busy. So that's what I do mainly, really. I used to go surfing every now and again,
Mm.
but I've not done that for a while. And jump in the back of the van, put a mattress in the back of the van, and go and drive to the beach and then sleep overnight there. That's great, but don't get much chance for that anymore, unfortunately.
You must have a big, long wetsuit. I mean, a heavy wetsuit.
Yeah, yeah, I do, and it's usually in the summertime I go in as well. So.
Um, is there anything else that you would like people to know about what we can learn from NDEs that we haven't discussed?
I think we've probably discussed it all, but I think, don't be afraid of death, start exploring it, read about it. And as I said earlier, when you start to learn about death, you really start to learn about life. And it can really have the opposite effect of making you feel morbid. It's actually can be very empowering as well. So don't be afraid to explore it. Go and seek out people who've had a near-death experience, have a chat with them, because they are the experts. They have got such wisdom that we can all learn from.
Mm-hmm. And I think you make the point too that some people are ready to die, so we shouldn't, make them hang around and suffer. We should let them go when if they say they're ready, they're ready,
Exactly, that's right.
and not
Yes.
intervene. Thank you so much. This was so interesting and informative. Looks like we have research for you to do with DDIs.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.